probably sick about COVID, as it has consumed so much of our lives already. But without chemistry in our lives, we would not have made the progress that we have so far in this pandemic. My group and I wanted to further explore how COVID vaccines were developed and address how we develop an immune response against the virus. This has sparked an interest for us because many people have been skeptical about whether or not to get vaccinated. And by further researching the virus and vaccination against it, we hope that we can help anyone that's on the fence about it. So with that being said, Rohan is going to start.
How's it going, everybody? So what is coronavirus? Coronavirus has taken many lives this past 2 years, but what exactly is COVID and what makes it so fatal? Coronavirus are a type of fatal viruses that have multiple strains and some actually cause diseases. Coronavirus was identified in 2019 and has caused a pandemic of respiratory illness called COVID-19 or coronavirus. Coronavirus can be severe and has caused millions of deaths around the world, as well as lasting health problems in some who have survived the illness. The symptoms of coronavirus are cough, fever, chills, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, muscle or body aches, sore throat, loss of taste or smell, diarrhea, headache, new fatigue, nausea, vomiting, and congestion or runny nose. Coronavirus spreads primarily from person to person. A person infected with the virus may discharge aerosols when they talk or breathe. Aerosols are infectious viral atoms that can linger around in the air for up to 3 hours. An individual can breathe in these aerosols and become infected with the virus. This is why masks are important to wear. Masks help prevent aerosols from reaching our bodies. And another way that COVID can actually transmit is poorly ventilated areas in crowded indoor settings, and contaminated surfaces, and coughing, sneezing, speaking, and breathing. So the history behind COVID is it first appeared in December 12th, 2019. A cluster of patients in Wuhan, Hubei, I'm trying my best with this pronunciation, Hubei, in China. That was the first case of COVID in December 1st, but when they realized what it was December 12th. The Chinese citizens began to experience shortness of breath and a fever. On January 2nd, the World Health Organization activates an incident management acknowledging the virus as a threat. Later that month, the US Secretary of Health and Human Services declared COVID-19 as a public health emergency, and the White House announces and enforces a new travel policy effective on February 2nd. March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization declares COVID-19 a pandemic, and that's when everything started shutting down. A few days later, the US began shutting down and imposing the in-home quarantine. Months go by, and on December 11, 2020, the Food and Drug Administration issued an emergency use authorization for the first COVID-19 vaccine. And here is a YouTube video on how COVID affects the body. All right, let me know if you guys can hear this.
Virus must infect living cells in order to reproduce. Let's have a closer look. Inside the virus, genetic material contains the information to make more copies of itself. A protein shell provides a hard protective enclosure for the genetic material as the virus travels between the people it infects. An outer envelope allows the virus to infect cells by merging with the cell's outer membrane. Projecting from the envelope are spikes of protein molecules. Both a typical influenza virus and the new coronavirus use their spikes like a key to get inside a cell in your body, where it takes over the cell's internal machinery, repurposing it to build the components of new viruses. When an infected person talks, coughs, or sneezes, droplets carrying the virus may land in your mouth or nose and then move into your lungs. Once inside your body, the virus comes in contact with cells in your throat, nose, or lungs. One spike on the virus inserts into a receptor molecule on your healthy cell membrane like a key in a lock. This action allows the virus to get inside your cell. A typical flu virus would travel inside a sac made from your cell membrane to your cell's nucleus that houses all its genetic material. The coronavirus, on the other hand, doesn't need to enter the host cell nucleus. It can directly access parts of the host cell called ribosomes. Ribosomes use genetic information from the virus to make viral proteins, such as the spikes on the virus's surface. A packaging structure in your cell then carries the spikes in vesicles, which merge with your cell's outer layer, the cell membrane. All the parts needed to create a new virus gather just beneath your cell's membrane. Then, a new virus begins to bud off from the cell's membrane. Now, with the virus spreading in your body, how can you develop pneumonia symptoms? For this, we'll have to look into your lungs. Each lung has separate sections called lobes. Normally, as you breathe, air moves freely through your trachea or windpipe, then through large tubes called bronchi, through smaller tubes called bronchioles, and finally into tiny sacs called alveoli. Your airways and alveoli are flexible and springy. When you breathe in, each air sac inflates like a small balloon. And when you exhale, the sacs deflate. Small blood vessels called capillaries surround your alveoli. Oxygen from the air you breathe passes into your capillaries, and then carbon dioxide from your body passes out of your capillaries into your alveoli so that your lungs can get rid of it when you exhale. Your airways catch most germs in the mucus that lines your trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles. In a healthy body, hair-like cilia lining the tubes constantly push the mucus and germs out of your airways, where you might expel them by coughing. Normally, cells of your immune system attack viruses and germs that make it past your mucus and cilia and enter your alveoli. However, if your immune system is weakened, like in the case of a coronavirus infection, the virus can overwhelm your immune cells, and your bronchioles and alveoli become inflamed as your immune system attacks the multiplying viruses. The inflammation can cause your alveoli to fill with fluid, making it difficult for your body to get the oxygen it needs. You could develop lobar pneumonia, where one lobe of your lungs is affected, or you could have bronchopneumonia that affects many areas of both lungs. Pneumonia may cause difficulty breathing, chest pain, coughing, fever and chills, confusion, headache, muscle pain, and fatigue. It can also lead to more serious complications. Respiratory failure occurs when your breathing becomes so difficult that you need a machine called a ventilator to help you breathe. These are the machines that save lives and that medical device companies currently ramp up production for. Whether you would develop these symptoms depends on a lot of factors, such as your age and whether you already have an existing condition. While this all sounds scary, the push to develop a coronavirus vaccine is moving at high speed. Studies of other coronaviruses led most researchers to assume that people who have recovered from a SARS-CoV-2 infection could be protected from reinfection for a period of time. But that assumption needs to be backed by empirical evidence, and some studies suggest otherwise. There are several different approaches for a potential vaccine against the coronavirus.
And Shada is now going to further explain how the vaccine works.
Share my screen real quick. Is that right? Okay. So, how is the COVID vaccine made? So there are three fundamental ingredients in the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. First is the mRNA, which is the protein derived from the surface molecule that helps COVID bind to our cells and is the active part of the vaccine. We have mRNA in abundance in all our cells, and mRNA is the messenger ribonucleic acid, and it uses the information in genes to create a blueprint for making proteins. So it's a natural product, and it's not derived from any cellular material, including fetal cells, for either of the vaccines. The next main ingredient is, what's that there? The next main ingredient is a lipid, which basically means it's a tiny ball of fat made similar to what we normally carry in our cells anyway, in our cell walls. Our body recognizes it and brings it into the cell. So it's also a natural product because we have it in our own cells. The third main ingredient is a carrier molecule called polyethylene glycol, or PEG. It's a common chemical used in many foods and even cosmetics. So it's something you might have contact with every day, whether you know it or not. This might be the ingredient that people are allergic to, but it's really rare to be allergic to. The only other ingredient is saline, and it's used to mix with it, and it's basically just salty water. And then potassium is a stabilizer. Ultimately, the ingredients are not super uncommon, so I think it can be reassuring to know that. Some people think that fetal cells are in parts of the vaccine, but it's not actually true. When making an mRNA vaccine like Pfizer and Moderna, you don't actually have any cells in it. A synthesizer is used to add each nucleic acid onto the next in the right sequence, so that you end up with a full-length RNA sequence that encodes the spike protein. However, there are other vaccines that have been derived from cell lines. For example, viral vectored vaccines that contain viruses as carrier molecules are sometimes grown in cells, like the AstraZeneca vaccine. But it can be used to only build a product, and the product won't have cells by the time they go into your arm. To make a viral vector vaccine like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine or AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccines, you take some of your harmless cold virus after you've added the spike protein DNA to it and grow it in the cell culture. Although the virus has been altered so it can't reproduce in the body, but it can still replicate in the specially designed cells in this cell culture. The cells have to be in a perfect environment, so there's a lot of monitoring for a lot of environmental factors in and around the cell culture, like the temperature, oxygen, CO2 levels, and acidity. Then you still have to go through the downstream processing to have a really safe and sterile product containing only what you want. So there are a lot of steps, and samples are taken in all the stages to experiment further and make sure it's like safe. I have a video.
Did you get the vaccine?
Oh, yes, yes.
Cells.
In the building behind me, we make the ethanol with the lipid together. After that, we start the magic.
So in the past, vaccines were typically made by using the virus itself or a fragment of the weakened or inactivated form of the virus. So an example of this would be basically like the influenza vaccines that are done every year. However, the new generation of vaccines, specifically this COVID one, uses the genetic instructions that make up the SARS, which is the pathogen that causes COVID. So before going into complex details, a brief overview is that Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson deliver the instructions for making the SARS spike protein, which is a part of the virus that lets it enter the human cells to begin with. So once these instructions are injected, human cells manufacture parts of the virus and coach the immune system to fight off the invader if it ever comes around. So if we were in class together, I would be making this awful drawing right in front of you guys. I'll do my best to kind of break it down in easy terms, but basically what chemists and scientists did was work backwards. So starting here, we have, the COVID virus here, and we have spike proteins at the end of it. So what they did is they took this spike protein and they got the mRNA. And then as Shida mentioned, what's inside of the vaccine is lipid, and that would be this piece right here. So basically what they did was like use it as a vehicle so that when it gets injected into our muscle, it fuses with the host cell. So at this point, it gets taken here to our ribosomes, and the ribosomes will start making that same S protein. So that's the spike protein that's on the COVID virus, right? So that gets put on display. And I try to think of it in easy terms as like, if we have this entire cell of ours and we know that it's made of different compartments and they're all trying to work together, and let's just say that they make like a wanted poster, right? And they're sharing that information between everyone. Like if there's something that doesn't belong here, make sure you kill it, doesn't belong. And then it takes it to the proteins that we have at the end and it puts it on display. That way we can build an immune response and kill off anything that doesn't belong. And essentially that would be our antibodies. I did have a video too, but since it's not working, I'm just gonna jump to some frequently asked questions and just some facts. So according to the CDC, about 63% of our population in California is fully vaccinated. It is still possible to get infected with COVID after vaccination, but the severity of the infection, meaning the intensity of your symptoms, are reported to be much more mild. So I guess they're saying that hospital stays are a lot less for people that are vaccinated. So you're ultimately decreasing the chances of being hospitalized or death, and a lot worse. Let's see. So there are some concerns that getting the injection causes myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart. And according to the CDC, the known risks of COVID illness and its related possible severe complications, such as long-term health problems, hospitalization, and even death, far outweigh the potential risk. So I guess despite the concerns that people have with that, they're still saying to get vaccinated, and hopefully we can get over this pandemic so we can be back in person. I think that's pretty much all we got here. Do you guys have anything, questions?